Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. Remember that I did a dirndl early this year? I have not done a blouse ever actually on my channel, or at least I haven't released a pattern of a blouse. And this year the fashionable blouse, I guess, is transparent, very light, very airy and super delicate looking. And I am absolutely in love with that style. So I figured it's best to do a quick blouse that anybody can do. It's very easy actually, and it's gonna look amazing nevertheless. I already made my mock-up in a nice material and it looks really good. I changed the sleeves a teeny tiny bit because they were too short. I want to have full-length sleeves. So basically that's all of the changes that I did, and we can start with the actual blouse now. I have this fabric in my stash sitting for a longer time already, and I knew I wanted to make a blouse for my dirndl, or for my mini dirndl I have, when I got it, because it's just so nice, super delicate, and it just screams dirndl blouse in my opinion. We're gonna make a V-line that's gonna overlap right here. The blouse is gonna end under the bust. We're gonna have some straps here to pull it down. That's just a small detail that I absolutely love in blouses. I feel like only a couple of blouses have them, where you have to pay a little bit more money to, you know, get that feature, I guess. So I've only seen them in more expensive blouses, so I definitely want to add that, and it's super easy. But it just is really convenient. If you have your dirndl on and you feel like your blouse sits too high, you pull on the two strings and it just moves down where it's supposed to sit. So we're gonna add that as well. And we're gonna do, as I said before, long sleeves. They're gonna have a little bit of puff here, an elastic here, like elastic cuffs, so they're super easy, super comfortable and convenient. And we're gonna have an elastic right here, so there is no closure whatsoever. You can just pull it over your head. So very nice, very easy. Let's go. So the first thing that I want to do is actually the neckline right here, because we're going to finish that area here with somewhat of a bias binding. Not really. We have this piece right here. It's the same fabric obviously, and it's stretchy. That's also a good thing if you have some sort of tulle or anything, you know, fabric like this, that it has some sort of stretchiness to it. I have not tried this blouse in a non-stretchy material, but usually if you have anything tulle-like, there is a stretch with the weave, like horizontal stretch. You don't need a stretch in the vertical direction, just horizontal should be fine. You also don't need too much. This is just for comfort. The fit should be fine without stretch, but as I said, I haven't tested it. So I have a piece that is 3 centimeters wide, and it's about the length of our back neckline, longer obviously. So I am going to put right sides together and sew at 1 centimeter right here, and I'm gonna not stretch too much, but I'm gonna have the 3 centimeter wide band curve around the back neckline. With the binding now attached, we're gonna iron the seam allowance into that strip, so away from our actual piece. And with ironing, please do an ironing test beforehand. We're working with very delicate material. They tend to melt easily, so you probably have to switch your iron to a lower setting just to avoid any complications. And now we're going to iron the raw edge down into that seam allowance here, so we have a total of 1 centimeter seam allowance, and that should be fairly easy because of the stretch. And we're gonna turn one last time down into the piece, and that is now the finished edge. We're gonna top stitch it in place as well, and that's gonna look very neat and tidy from the right side. And now we're gonna stitch along this outer perimeter about 1 centimeter. Once ironed flat, we're done with this, and we can cut down the seam allowance here at the shoulder seams and put the back piece aside for now. And we're gonna grab our front pieces. They have this long diagonal seam here in the front that's gonna crisscross over top of itself, so it's gonna lay something like this in the very end. And this edge, I just want to fold 5 millimeters in and in again, and we're just gonna top stitch along that edge on both sides. Now let's go ahead and iron that seam flat. Obviously, if you want to, you can add any trim here on this seam, or you can do that once you have the neckline completely together, so once the shoulder seams are closed. I'm going to keep it rather simple because I feel like the pattern calls for somewhat of simplicity, and I really like that idea, so I'm just going to leave it like that. Now that I'm done with the front edge right here, I am going to put the center front notch together right here. I'm just going to put both pieces on top of each other, and then the edges here should match up with the notch in the pieces. You just match those up as well, like that, and you can base the piece now together here into the seam allowance. And now I'm going to close my shoulder seam, and I'm going to do French seams wherever I can. So I'm gonna put the wrong sides together here of my shoulder seam, and the back is going to be a teeny tiny bit wider. That's for fitting purposes. You just do that. So you just want to ease both pieces together. Make sure here that your 1 centimeter stitching line, or however much seam allowance you put in this piece, that you match up that point right here. I added a centimeter, so both of these lengths are matching up at a centimeter. That's important. Even though you're stitching at 3 millimeters or 5 millimeters or whatever, you still want your pieces to match up at that 1 centimeter line here, because you're going to fold it and then stitch again, and then you're going to have that fold line or stitching line right at that spot. So that's very important for a clean finish, like this. And then let's go very close to that edge at 3 millimeters. Let's cut the seam allowance down to, say, 2 millimeters, something like that. And I'm going to iron my seam allowance into the back, just so that the next step is a teeny tiny bit easier for me, which is folding it again and ironing it. So now my right sides are facing, and I can go right here and finish the shoulder seam with a French seam. And this is now going to be my wrong side, where the bulk is, and I'm going to have a nice and finished shoulder seam. And that's the shoulder seam finished. Let's iron it into the back, and look how nice that looks. Super clean, love that. So let's go ahead and continue with the sleeves. We're going to gather the sleeve cap, and I just like to add a gathering stitch from the front sleeve notch all the way over the shoulder point to the back sleeve notch right here. For this fabric, 1 gathering stitch is fine. I bet that if I put my stitching length to the max, it's gonna gather for me. So that's a small little hack. If you can adjust your tension for your upper thread, just make it a teeny tiny bit higher, the tension, and do your stitch length to the max as you would usually do for your gathering stitch. And since the fabric is so lightweight, the machine will probably gather for you already. So I'm gonna go ahead and back tag right here at my start, go over here, see how much it gathers, and then just, you know, not back tag and leave a little bit of thread so that I can adjust the gathering over here. So that should be all that I need to do, but, you know, let's see. Let's gather the sleeve cap. As predicted, the machine already gathered for me, so that is very convenient. I am going to check which sleeve goes where. You can always do that by the distance to side seam to sleeve notches. So where there is a smaller distance right here, that is the front section. So I know that this sleeve goes onto this shoulder seam right here, front, back, then also in my sleeve, front, back. Putting right sides together. I'm not going to do a French seam here because this is tulle. It's not going to fray, so I can just, you know, cut down the seam allowance to 5 millimeters or whatever and leave it as is, so that's fine. So I'm going to put my shoulder notch in my sleeve together with my shoulder seam in my bodice right here. I'm going to match up the sleeve notch and then the side seam, and then the same on the other side. Like that. And you can see that it gathered a teeny tiny bit too much. I'm adjusting that under the machine, but obviously you can go along the shoulder and, you know, gather the sleeve cap accordingly. You want to have most of the gathers along the shoulder seam. That just looks the best, and then you're going to gradually decrease the gathers towards the notches on either side, back and front, like that. And now we can go ahead and sew along here. Let's cut down the seam allowance to about 5 millimeters. So you want to be super careful here. And that should also get rid of most of the gathering stitch. If there's still some in there, take that out as well, because it is transparent fabric. Obviously, you don't want to have anything like that in your piece. It just looks messy. I just thought I cut into my sleeve. I think I didn't. Okay, that looks good and clean. Then we can go ahead and iron all of the seam allowance into the sleeve. I like to use a round tailor's hem like this one. Okay, that's what that looks like. Very cute. With the sleeve now in place, we can go ahead and close the side seam, and I want to do French seams here as well. So I'm just going to have wrong sides together, and same as with the shoulder seam, I'm going to stitch at 3-4 millimeters, something like that, all along the side seam, making sure that everything is matched up. Let's clip away the seam allowance down to 3 millimeters, something like that. And we can turn this piece wrong sides out and do the final go over top of the side seam at 5 millimeters, just as we did with our shoulder seam. Let's iron the seam allowance into the back. Okay, leave the whole thing wrong sides out because we're going to work on the elastic now. And for that, we're just going to do a tunnel that's going to be double folded. Depending on what elastic you're using, I am going to use a very small one, which is just 2 millimeters wide. So I can make this as tiny as I can, probably a double fold of 5 millimeters. If you have any wider elastic, you need to, make it bigger, I guess. And this is a small hack because I've done this so many times. I ironed the French seam now towards the back. So I want to start my opening behind that. So when I go in, I am going with how the seam allowance is ironed. Not going to end up like this and I can't get out, So I'm going to go in this direction once I insert my elastic, and I'm not going to have to worry about getting stuck underneath that seam allowance here. So let's go ahead and fold this like that. I'm going to start here, and I'm probably going to leave a centimeter or something like that open here, so that I have this section as a whole and I can insert my elastic then. To measure how much I want, I'm just going to put the elastic around my wrist and check where it sits comfortably, probably here. And then I know that I can cut it right here. I'll need 2 of those. And this is obviously synthetic material, so I'm just going to melt the edges to avoid any fraying. And with a safety pin, a small one in my case, I can insert the elastic into the tunnel that I just made. This is a tight fit. But it should be fine. So I'll insert my elastic here. I'll also pin my end onto my piece so that I won't lose it, because then I can start again. I'll just secure it like that, and now I can go around without having to worry to lose that end. And I come out the other side. So what I like to do, because I've done my tryout already and I sewed these pieces together. Now what happened to me one time was that it just opened up and I lost it inside of my tunnel and I had to redo everything again. So I am instead gonna do a knot, secure it in place, and this should never come undone. And I'm just going to do this a couple of times so that the knot also disappears on the inside of my tunnel like so. And all of the gathers from the elastic are distributed evenly like this. And now you just want to go over that small area here and close it so that the elastic is inside there secured. And we're going to repeat the same on the other sleeve. Last thing is the elastic here, and then obviously the two straps to pull everything down. I have my waistband for the elastic right here. It's the same length as my circumference down here plus seam allowance. So I'm gonna go ahead and close this right here at 1 centimeter. I'm gonna iron that seam allowance open. You can leave it as is, as it's gonna sit on the inside, it's not gonna be seen. And I also want to fold this in half and iron it. Like that. And for inserting the elastic, I'm going to mark half, my halfway point right here. This is going to be the center front. This is going to be my back where the seam is, and I want to make it visible. And I'm also gonna mark my sides by also just folding it again, like that. So now I have 4 different spots that I can match up with my elastic. I'm going to use 2.5 centimeter wide elastic. You should also buy elastic that is that wide, otherwise it won't fit together with your elastic waistband that you just prepared. I am going to do the circumference of my under bust where it sits nice and tight, and I'm gonna do 4 centimeter seam allowance because we're gonna overlap them 2 centimeters. So it's not bulky, which is exactly what we're gonna do first. Check that it is not twisted, and then you're gonna overlap the piece like so, 2 centimeters, and do a top stitch here. And we're gonna do the same markings that we just did on our shell fabric on our elastic. So we should end up with 4 markings on both shell and elastic to indicate front, back, and both sides. So now we can fuse both together. So the seam right here corresponds to the seam in the elastic. So I'm going to put the elastic inside of my shell and pin it in place. Then the next marking goes together with the one in the shell. Then we do the front and the remaining side. And once we stretch this, you can see the elastic lays inside of our shell waistband, and we're gonna stitch very closely to that elastic end. It's gonna be at around 1 centimeter, give or take, and we're gonna go all around. So stretch and then sew. Now that is what it looks like. Super cute. It all works very nicely with this kind of thin material because the elastic just gathers it like that, cinches it in like that. So with that done, we can now prep the strings to pull everything down. And I am simply going to use some bias binding. I have this already prepped, but I'm gonna do another one with you guys. So I probably need maybe this long, what is that, 25 centimeters. So I'll double that because I need 2. And I'm just gonna fold the bias binding in half and top stitch on both sides. Now I do both to just reinforce this, since it is, elastic a teeny tiny bit as it is on the bias. So I just want to reinforce that one seam to avoid any ripping or whatsoever. So let's go ahead and do the top stitch on both sides. I also double folded the ends and top stitched them so that they are finished as well. And now we can just fold them in half and snip them in the center, like that. And now our straps are prepared and done. Those get in the center of side seam and that point where the other front half meets. You're gonna attach your pulling thingies on both sides. For now, we can just do some pins in here, and we're gonna secure them in place with the waistband in one go. Speaking about the waistband, let's do that. This right here is my center front marking. So I'm going to put that right sides together with the notch in my center front of my piece. And we're gonna go around. Gonna match up our sides and our back and the other side as well. And we're gonna do exactly the same. We're gonna stretch and then sew everything at 1 centimeter to secure everything in place. So because I don't want to necessarily iron this flat, I'm just gonna lay it like this. The seam allowance is gonna lay towards, you know, the bodice because of the elastic. I am just gonna steam it like this. The straps are gonna face downwards like that. And the last thing that I want to do is I want to secure these straps onto the elastic. So I'm gonna bar tack right here so that once you pull, it's not gonna pull like this, but it's gonna pull like this, like on the elastic. Okay, I decided the seam allowance was a bit too crazy looking, so I am going to cut it down to 5 millimeters. Once I am right here at the strap, I'm not gonna cut down the seam allowance of the strap because it needs that strength. So I'm just gonna cut around it. And then I can also take out that basting stitch in the center front where I fused the two sides together. I think with that it just looks a teeny tiny bit better. And that's it already. Actually, this was a super quick sew, barely needed 2 hours, something like that. So that is super, super convenient. If you have not yet decided which blouse you want to wear, just make yourself one, and this is a very good and easy option, and I bet it's gonna look so elegant. So I can't wait to put this all together. I'm going to wear this out with my purple dirndl that I did earlier this year, so all of the pictures are gonna be the full set. Super excited about that, can't wait. If you haven't already, please go ahead and subscribe to my channel and ring the bell so you'll get notified every time that I post. I post on Sundays, so you can keep an eye out for that. I have lately been doing a 2 weeks interval because I have a few things going on in the background. I'm super excited, cannot share that yet, but it's a big project and you're gonna hear more about that later this year. Early next year. For all of the news and everything like that, go over to my Instagram. I am more active on my stories there for more personal updates or fast updates and whatnot. Go ahead and check that out. I'm doing short format content over on my socials, so that might be of interest to you. This pattern will be available in my shop. You can check out the first link in the description box below. I am super excited to see all of your versions of this blouse. I think this is a very versatile pattern for many body types because of how it has room and how elastic it is. So can't wait to see that on you guys. And you know, my Etsy store is the most direct way to support me and my channel, so thank you so much for that. And another way to support me is to become a member here on my YouTube channel. Check out the link in the description box below for that. Thanks so much for watching, and I'm gonna see you next Sunday. Bye guys!